And thank you guys for having me. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about bats in Scotland. So kind of a central overview of the species that you're most likely to see, where it's best to see them, and how best to get involved with bats in your local area. Oh, there we go. First off, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about myself and my background and how I kind of got into this work. So, and also how I became the mother of bats. That's something my friends call me. It's a Game of Thrones reference. Khaleesi, Mother of Dragons. Yeah, they call me Khaleesi, Mother of Bats. So I thought I'd just explain how I kind of got this name. But as I was just saying earlier, I have traveled all over, but I'll start off at the beginning. So I studied biological science to master's level at the University of Aberdeen. I'm actually from Aberdeen. And when I did my master's, I was mostly involved in conservation genetics, molecular ecology and evolution. But I've always had a really strong love of bats. And even just when I was really little, and I especially remember like early episodes of Planet Earth and seeing the cave episodes with the bats, and I was just so fascinated at how they've evolved to be this way. So I've always loved them. And although I did cover them in my degree, it wasn't like a bat degree. I mean, I don't know if you get bat degrees, but I didn't have a bat specialism in my degree. Then once I graduated, I started working as a consultant ecologist in private sector consultancy. For an environmental consultancy, and I did that for just over 5 years. I put my little map to show you where I've been. So I started in Aberdeen. I eventually then, after like a year and a half of working in Aberdeen, I covered all of like Aberdeenshire as well. I moved up to Inverness, and when I was in Inverness, I covered all of the Highlands and Islands. So I worked in Orkney, I worked all over. I spent a lot of time just north of Ullapool up towards Assynt, which is, I would say, my favorite place in the world. Like, I'll go ahead and say that, in the world. Like, I absolutely love it. And then after that, there was a job opening in our Edinburgh office. This is back when I was a consultant, to lead on the Central Belt bat work. So I moved down to Edinburgh for that. I've never lived in Glasgow, but I've covered a lot of the Central Belt, and I worked in our Glasgow office. So I've been in quite a lot of places. So I kind of just want to let you know, there'll be times I'll be talking about places to see bats and things like that. So I might be able to give you some tips nearby where you live. When I was a consultant, I did specialize in bats, among other protected mammals and a few other habitats as well. And I also was a volunteer bat carer for the Bat Conservation Trust. So I started volunteering for the Bat Conservation Trust just after I graduated from Aberdeen. So I've been doing that for over 5 years, maybe pushing 6 now. I'm volunteering for the Bat Conservation Trust. And I also have a Scottish Natural Heritage and Bat Roost visitor license. So I obtained that when I was a consultant. You don't need a license to be a bat carer, but I have one anyway, mainly from my job before. But yeah, I'm just gonna let you know a little background about me. Now I work as a project development officer and the ecologist for a project called Edinburgh Thriving Green Spaces. I work for the Scottish Wildlife Trust, and the project is actually led by Edinburgh Council. But we lead, and I lead essentially, on the ecology work stream that we have within there. And right now, I've been chatting a lot with Karen. I work with Karen a bit. I'm creating something called, developing something with other stakeholders and other organisations called an ecological coherence plan for Edinburgh, which is looking at habitat connectivity within the city and the surrounding, and also at ecosystem services, so the benefits that we receive from nature and how best that we can improve these within the city. That's a little background on what I do now and where I've been, where my experience comes from. I just put a little disclaimer, I'm not claiming to be the world's biggest bat expert ever. There's always going to be someone that has about 3 PhDs on bats or something that will know more than me, but this is my experience I had before, and I'm just very much a bat enthusiast, and I just have been forever. But even though that in my degree and in my jobs and stuff, it's not always been bats, I've always kind of tried to do some volunteer stuff for bats as well. So I thought I would just kick some things off on bat facts. I'm sorry, I don't know anyone's like base level of experience. I thought I'd just go quite general, but kind of interesting is what I tried to go for here. So bats are the only true flying mammal. There are over 1,400 species of bats in the world. In the UK, we only have microbats, which are these guys up here, but elsewhere in the world, you get megabats, which also get called flying foxes or fruit bats. I don't know if anyone sees these, but you get really cute videos of them on Facebook, like eating bananas. which if anyone wants to see those, I can link you to those because it's one of my favorite pastimes, just watching them eat bananas. I have received bats for bat care where they put, like, as in these bats, micro bats like we get here, where people put like a whole banana in with the bat, and the bat's like a third of the size of the banana. But I think it comes from seeing these videos of the fruit bats. And bats account for more than 1/4 of all mammal species that we have in the UK. All bat species in the UK use echolocation to navigate, and they hunt for insects in the dark. A pipistrelle can eat up to 3,000 insects in one night. So if you don't like midges, that could be 3,000 midges in a night, which is fantastic. Really good natural midgie control there. And yeah, your megabats, they don't echolocate. So that's unique to the microbats that we have in the UK. Bats are not blind. I don't know if people knew this before, but I do get it asked quite a lot. It's just that when they echolocate, they can see so much better through their echolocation than they can with their eyes, but they can still see with their eyes, just not very well. And this is a Donya fact. This is one of my facts. Bats and mice have really similar looking poo. So when you work as a consultant, you spend a lot of time just looking at like the poo of the animals you study rather than seeing them themselves. And I would often get people telling me they had mice in their lofts, but it's in fact bats. A good telltale, and this is with gloves on, obviously, if you are to touch and crumble the poos, bat poo will crumble like dust, and it can sometimes be a bit sparkly because of all the insect wings. And lastly, bats usually only have one baby a year, and they regularly live up to 30 years. The oldest bat on record is 41 years, and they're the longest living mammal in relation to their size. So I don't know if you've ever had like a hamster or, like a pet rat or something. They tend to live for a couple of years, but in contrast, yeah, you have these bats that live 30 to 40 years. And they think that's actually linked to the telomeres on the edge of their chromosomes. And bats have really, really long telomeres, and in most other mammals, these deteriorate with age, and that's for humans as well. And they think in humans, when our telomeres start to deteriorate, that can be linked to age-related diseases and problems and things like Alzheimer's. But they found in bats, they have really long ones, and they stay long. They don't deteriorate with time. So they think that's linked to their long life, which I thought was quite interesting. So I thought I'd just touch a little bit on bat ecology and like the yearly cycle for a bat. So where bats live is called a roost. They do not make nests and they do not make roosts, and they use pre-existing structures. And throughout the year, they'll live in various different ones. They don't use the same one all year round. And these can be in houses, churches, bridges, trees, anything really. And I'll start us off in winter. So in winter, bats hibernate so they can conserve energy when insects are hard to find. And they go into what's called states of torpor, where they shut down their metabolic system, slow everything right down, and go into this hibernation. And that conserves their energy. They tend to hibernate in cool, frost-free, and humid sites, which can be like caves, thick stone walls, like old castle ruins and things like that I found bats in, and trees as well. We don't know actually a huge amount of detail about where all bats go when they hibernate. It's still actually quite a new field in a way that's all quite unknown, but this is our current thinking of where they go and where we found bats hibernating before. Then when we move into spring, the bats will start to emerge when the weather gets warmer, and at this time they're very hungry and active, and they're out feeding most nights because they've been hibernating. They're also pregnant at this time, and they're pregnant when they're hibernating as well, the female bats. And in spring, the female bats will then start to gather with each other in warm, safe maternity roosts in preparation for having their babies. And they can roost in really high numbers. I've done a roost count with over 500 bats at Haddow House in Aberdeenshire, if you've ever been there. But you can get up to like 1,000 female bats in a maternity roost. So they all come together pregnant to have their babies. Then in summer, the mums will give birth to one baby, which is called a pup, and that's in early summer. The pup will then feed on the mother's milk, and then it will start to fly at around 3 weeks old. So this picture here, this is actually one of mine. This is one of my most recent bat care bats. All the other pictures you've seen are pretty much from the Bat Conservation Trust, just FYI. And this little guy, he's about 2 to 2.5 weeks old at this point. And he was starting to pop out his wings a bit. They start to do this before they start to fly. They kind of pop them out, start to do little like wing stretches. They'll sometimes stretch them up and then kind of do little push-ups on them as well when they're warming up to learn to fly. And then, 3 weeks old, that's when they actually start flying. Then when we move into autumn, when the pups are around 6 weeks old, well, young bats, they then begin to catch insects and fly for themselves. At this point, they no longer rely on their mothers. The summer maternity roosts will then start to disperse, and the bats will move on to mating roosts, where they will breed and they'll build up some fat stores for winter. The males will then use special calls to attract the females. So essentially, autumn is just all about like eating and getting fat. It's kind of what they're doing, eating and breeding, getting fat, getting ready for winter, and then the cycle continues again. Then I thought it might be quite good to touch about what bat species we have in Scotland. I could talk at length about all the different bat species, but I thought we're all in Scotland, we should go for that. So we have 10 bat species in Scotland, and the Bat Conservation Trust have actually made this really fantastic leaflet called Bats in Scotland, which at the end of this presentation, I've done a page of like useful resources, and this is one of them that I've linked in, so you can get hold of this. And it's really great. It's got some fantastic infographics with a bit more detail than what I'm going into right now, so you can have a look at that later. And these are the 10 species that we have. So we've got the soprano pipistrelle, the common pipistrelle, the brown long-eared bat, the Davidson bat, the Nethusius pipistrelle, the noctule, which is our biggest one, the natterer's bat, Leisler's bat, the whiskered bat, and Brandt's bat. I don't think, and I could be wrong, so someone can correct me if they know, I don't think we have many records of the Brandt's bat. I think it's one of those that we don't have many records of it, but it is counted as one of our 10. They did used to think it was only 9, but now they count the Brandts. What I'm going to talk about today is these 4 here, because these are the ones that you're most likely to see. And you can see from this infographic here, we only really have all 10 right down here in Galloway Forest Park, and then you get less and less as you go further north. But these 4, like for everyone here, they're good ones. You'll probably have a good chance of seeing those. So I'll start us off with the soprano pipistrelle. So the soprano pipistrelle is Scotland's most common bat, which is a bit confusing because it's not the common pipistrelle, but it's our most common one. And it looks very similar to the common pipistrelle, but they echolocate at different frequencies. So a soprano pipistrelle echolocates at 55 kilohertz, and a common pipistrelle echolocates at 45 kilohertz. If you're interested in getting more information on these kind of nitty-gritty facts, like the echolocation frequencies and like forearm measurements and the weight of bats, I put a link in the references bit to a page on the Bat Conservation Trust that has a fact sheet for every single species in the UK, and it's got this level of detail. So if that's something you're interested in, I've linked that down there. The soprano pipistrelle, it has a little bit of a ginger tinge to its fur. That's the way that you can sometimes tell the difference between common pipistrelles. And they tend to prefer roosting in buildings. So they're the ones you're most likely to see just roosting in your house. They aren't the fussiest of bats. They will roost in all sorts of other structures, but it's most commonly in buildings. Then for the common pipistrelle, it is the only bat that you can find up in the islands up north, like in Orkney and Shetland, and it's our most common species in the north of Scotland. So they're kind of our hardiest bat. They aren't put off by the colder temperatures and things like that further north. They've got darker colouring around the eyes and the face compared to the soprano. And they also like to roost in buildings, similar to the soprano pipistrelle. They're not fussy. These guys will roost in most things, but you're very likely to see them in one of your homes. That's kind of where they tend to roost. Next, we have the Davidson's bat. This is what some people call the water bat. And this is because they feed by skimming over low-flowing water. And they take insects from the air and skim them from the water surface. And they have a white belly, and they're actually quite bare around their eyes, and they don't have too much hair around their eyes. That's quite characteristic of them. And they always tend to roost near water where they feed. So for this reason, you find them quite a lot in bridges over slow-flowing rivers and in trees. But I have heard that in Scotland, they will regularly roost in houses and buildings and things like that as well, as long as they're near a water source that they can use for food. And lastly, the brown long-eared bat. So this is my favorite. I just love them. And moths are a very important part of their diet, more so than for other species. They echolocate really quietly, so they can be really tricky if you're trying to go out and survey them with a bat detector. And I've heard some people calling them the whispering bat for this reason. I put in that they do a stealth attack. So basically, a lot of moth species that the brown long-eared bat eats have developed the ability to pick up the echolocation of the brown long-eared. And the brown long-eared can then shut off his echolocation. Sorry, I just got a notification, but I think I'm still sharing my screen. Yeah, we're still good. Perfect, yeah. So, sorry, I'll start that bit again. So some moth species that the brown long-eared eats, they can pick up the echolocation of the brown long-eared bat. So what the brown long-eared bat will do is then shut off its echolocation and literally hunt with its ears, with its giant ears, and do it purely through sound. And it's like the stealth kind of ninja attack on the moths, which I think is just really amazing, and evolution just fascinates me. But yeah, very interesting fact about the brown long-eared. They have their very characteristic big ears. So if you see a bat in Scotland that's got big ears like this, it's the brown long-eared. Down in England and other parts of the UK, you do get the grey long-eared bat, but I'm not going to go into that because we don't have any here. So if you see them in Scotland, it's the brown long-eared. And they tend to roost in big open loft spaces where there's woodland nearby. So you commonly get them in like old castles and churches and things that have these kind of spaces. So I thought I'd touch a bit on where is best to see bats. And timing is really key for seeing bats. So the best time is around sunset or just before dawn on a warm, dry and calm summer's night. So by warm, the guidance says that you should only conduct bat surveys, this is for commercial bat surveys, if it's 12 degrees or above for the UK. But in Scotland, it's commonly accepted like 8 degrees or above. So it's not warm, but you're going to see bats, hopefully, if it's 8 degrees or above. But if you're just watching bats for fun, I recommend doing it when it's a little bit warmer than that, but just to give you an idea. And it can't be raining. They don't cope well in heavy rain or even just a little bit of rain, really. Drizzle is kind of fine. And it has to be calm. It can't be too windy, just a light breeze at best. One of the best ways to see bats is when they're emerging from or re-entering a roost. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this and probably end up repeating myself, but a great way to watch bats in local roosts is to join your local bat group, because they will know where all the great roosts are. And like I said, with maternity roosts, you can literally have hundreds of bats, and you can rock up to these around sunset and just watch all these bats come out. And it's just a really fantastic experience. So if you haven't done that, I highly recommend doing that. I popped an example here. This is Crathis Castle in Aberdeenshire, if anyone's been there. And they have a roost of brown long-ears there. All bats will emerge at different times. So brown long-ears are what we call late emergers. They tend to emerge about 45 minutes after sunset. But if you remember, I mentioned those fact sheets that have like the more in-depth information. They will have that kind of information for each species. So I won't bore you guys going into like statistics like that right now. One of the other great ways to see bats is within woodland, parkland, or lines of trees. And I know here in Edinburgh, I've heard from our local bat group as well, that we have bats in most of our local parks and green spaces, which is fantastic. The examples I put here, this is Inverleith Park. So something like this, where you've got like a big avenue of mature trees, is a really great way to see bats. And species like the common pipistrelle and soprano pipistrelle use these linear features to navigate and to commute and to forage along them. I've also put an example here. This is the Royal Deeside Way, again, another Aberdeenshire reference, but any kind of old railway line or something that's like a linear route with trees on the side is really good. It also means as well that you can walk whilst watching bats. So if you don't like just sitting in the same place, you can go on a bat walk if you choose one of these routes. Then lastly, if you go by any like water courses, slow flowing water courses and water bodies is a really, really great way to see bats, especially your Debenton's bats that I mentioned earlier. And you can see on this close up, you can really see that kind of baldy patches around his eyes, which is again, one of their features. So this here is Duddington Loch. It's a really great place if you want to see Debenton's in Edinburgh. And up here is Ness Islands in Inverness, if anyone ever goes to Inverness. You get Debenton's along there as well. It's quite slow flowing. It's a really good place to see them. And although I've listed like the brown long-eared, the pipistrelle, the Debenton's for each one, you will get multiple different bat species of these. And if you can combine them all, it's even better. If you can get some kind of linear walkway, like something like Water of Leith, you've got like slow flowing parts of that with some trees, you can get multiple species, which is fantastic. So I thought I'd put together my top tips for bat watching, because I've been doing this for a long time and I've learned a few things along the way that I thought I could share with you guys if you want to go do some bat watching. So firstly, just start small. If you've not done this before, if you're lucky enough to have a garden, just try your garden or like a local park or green space, and chances are you might get some bats. use a bat detector for the full experience. So I know they can be quite expensive to buy, but this is another reason why I suggested joining your local bat group, because they will have bat detectors, they will do free guided walks or roost counts and things like that. So you get all the joy of having the bat detector and hearing all the sounds, but without having to purchase one yourself and deal with that yourself. I put hearing the zrup as they forage for insects. So when you're using the bat detector, it's picking up the frequency that the bats are echolocating at. And as they get closer to the insects, that sound gets quicker, 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 because it's bouncing slower, slower, slower. And eventually when they get whatever it is, it makes it like sort of sound. And I just really like it because you can just hear midges being eaten, which is great. So it's a really good way. I recommend just having the bat detector for that extra level of fun. Yeah, join your local bat group. I've said it again. I'm going to keep saying it throughout. I've put Lothian's bat group because that's a bat group that I'm part of, but I've been part of North East Scotland bat group when I was in Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire. Then I was part of Inverness bat group, and they do some amazing things. Like in Inverness, and I missed this one, I was gutted. They did like a canoe trip down the river and then listen to Debentons on like canoe kayak type things, which was really interesting. So join your local bat group because they do some really fun events and things like that. I know that Natalie Todman, who's from Lothian's bat group, she's actually got a Scottish Wildlife Trust bat walk coming up in September. She said it was okay for me to mention. I checked with her. I think it's for Blackford Hill, but I could be wrong, so I don't want to quote myself on that one. But she did say it could get cancelled due to COVID reasons, but if anyone wants more information on that, I can find out for you. Then stay safe. So I know it seems like a no-brainer, but because I've moved around a lot, what I would find myself doing is what I'll look at is like aerial or satellite imagery, and I'll try find my little linear routes or find a water body. And what I would do, this is younger Donya with less experience, would then go out to these places at dusk by herself and then have a moment where I realize I'm maybe not in a not so good area, and then think, no, maybe I shouldn't be here, need to be safe. So I know it's a bit of a no-brainer, but just wanted to mention that, like, don't get carried away like I did when I was younger and go running after bats and not checking the safety of the area first. And this kind of links in with stay safe. Go with friends or family. And sometimes when you're new to this kind of thing, it can take a wee while to locate your bats. And having company can really make that time fly and make it more fun. Also having like a hot flask is a good idea as well. So bring midge repellent. This is probably my biggest one. Bring midge repellent. I use Smidge. I think it's probably the best one that I have used, or bring like a midge net for your face, because if you are in a good place for bats, you're in a good place for midges or other insects as well. So definitely bring that for bat watching. And lastly, make yourself comfortable. So when I used to work as a consultant, you would sometimes get people being really proud that they've stood for like 2.5, 3 hours staring at a building, be like, yeah, I stood the whole time. And we used to all be like, yeah, we have to stand, we're professional and stuff like that. But it kind of got to a point where I was leading on it in the Central Belt. I was like, we don't need to be standing. Like, you can do a better job if you make yourself comfortable. So I first started off with the fold down chair, which then built up to the fold down chair plus the blanket. Then I added in the hot water bottle. Then I added in the latte that I took with me. And you can really make it as luxurious as you like. And it does make it a lot more enjoyable if you're cozy. And if you're doing one where you're standing, you can get quite cold standing still. Or I get quite stiff legs, so I stand, I like to pace a little bit. So yeah, make it comfy, bring things with you. And obviously this is easier once you found your spot. You don't want to be carrying around loads of stuff when you don't know where your bats are. But when you find your little bat watching spot, bring all these things and make it comfortable, make it enjoyable. So I thought I'd talk a bit on how you can help bats and how you might want to get more involved in bat work. So there are many, many ways to get involved with bats. You can take part in the National Bat Monitoring Programme, which is run by the Bat Conservation Trust, and they have a range of surveys to suit all abilities. And I know that during the lockdown, they did a bat watch. It was called like a sunset bat watch, I think they called it. And you don't need a bat detector. And it was just when everyone was locked down, we couldn't get out. You just had to sit by your window between like a certain time frame around sunset and just say if you saw bats or not. So if you had a bat detector, you could tell the species, but if you don't, it's fine. They just wanted to know, do you see bats? Do you not see bats? And that information was really, really helpful because so many people got to engage with bats in this way, just from their home in a lockdown scenario. And that is really useful information for the Bat Conservation Trust because, yeah, it can show kind of presence and absence of bats. Join your local bat group. I've said it again, here we are. You can help with roost counts, which again are some of my favorites. You can do bat box checks and things like that. And they will often be with a licensed bat worker like myself because they'll go and check them because you need a license to do that. And often when you do these kind of ones, they will take out the bats and see what species they are. So it's a really good time to see bats close up. Also, I also have to do this SNH bat worker disclaimer that you should only ever handle bats with gloves on, and that's to protect yourself and protect the bats. And that's just for people with a license. So if you don't have a license, you shouldn't handle bats, period. And the last one is just about joining your local bat care network, and you can receive training to become a bat carer, and you can also become a bat ambulance driver. So I thought I'd explain a little bit how that works, and this is what I found really, really enjoyable. And like I said, I've been doing this for years and I still really love it. So when someone finds a bat, just like a member of the public, they might find it in their house, in their garden. I've had someone find a bat in their toilet. People will find bats everywhere. And the person who finds it will probably Google, what do I do because I found a bat? And the Bat Conservation Trust helpline number will come up. They will then call the helpline, and then they will take the person's address or where they found the bat, and they'll locate the closest carer from like a big interactive map. So I'm a carer in Edinburgh, and I cover quite a big area of Lothians and like actually down to the borders. We don't actually have too many carers here, so we're trying to build them up if we can, but we've got quite a few ambulance drivers, which is great. So yeah, then once they've done the call, they'll be put in touch with probably myself if it's in the Edinburgh region, or another bat carer. And like I said, we've got the ambulance drivers. So what I mean by that, these are people who maybe don't want to touch the bats or like interact physically with bats, but they've very, very kindly offered to help drive bats, either between someone that's found them and a bat carer, or say from myself, when I've got a baby that needs to go off to a flight cage and I can't for any reason get out to that flight cage, they can help. Or sometimes you even join up, and we've had like multiple different carers, myself and ambulance drivers, to get bats, like even from here across through to like Glasgow and things like that. So there are people signed up really nicely to help just drive bats from different places. Then once I have a bat, the rehabilitation process starts. So when I get the bat, I will do a full inspection to see for any injuries. I will obviously identify the species. I will look at the wings. I will look for any breaks or any tears, any nicks. I will look for to see if they've got mites. You get lots of different kinds of mites in bats. Some are good, some are bad. Any kind of bruising, just anything. I'll check their mouths, check they've got all their teeth, just like a full MOT kind of bat inspection when I first get them. And I thought I'd put a few examples. So I'll start with this one. These are both my photos. These are my bats I've had before. So this is a lovely little brown long-eared. He was a juvenile, and he was found just outside a hotel, just on the ground. And the owner said that there was crows kind of swarming around him. And what happens in this kind of autumn time when the juveniles are out learning to fly, they're really clumsy, they maybe don't understand like bad weather, and they can't fly in it, and they end up grounded. So when a bat ends up on the ground, it's actually really difficult to get them back flying again. They kind of need to drop and then fly. So when they're on the ground, sometimes they can't always just get right back up, and they can end up there for a few days, sometimes even like a week. And this little guy, he had no injuries, but he was just young, and he'd ended up on the ground. He was really underweight. And I just needed to feed him up, get him some water, get him flying again, and then get him back out. Then this other one was a common pipistrelle that I had, and he had this tear in his wing up here. This is what he was like when I first got him, and he couldn't fly when he had the tear like this. Then after about, I think it was 2 weeks I had him for, I just kind of feeding him up, getting him moving the wing, doing little bits of flight practice. I got him flying again, and that was almost 100% healed. He just had like a teeny last little bit to heal. Then once he was flying, he was good to go. He could fly just like normal, and I released him back out. So that's the last stage. Once you're rehabilitated, you release back into the wild. You normally just take them where they were found, if it's like a suitable place, but sometimes you find them in weird places, like weird industrial units and things like that, and it's not suitable. If that's the case, you'll then just look for the closest suitable habitat for the bats and release them there. That is almost it for me, but I thought I would just finish it on like a little case study. One of my most recent bats I've had, he was called Covey. I mean, I called him Covey. He didn't like come and tell me his name. And that's because I got him just at the beginning of lockdown. And I remember when I first got him and they were talking about the lockdown, and I was like, this is going to be my lockdown buddy. Like, we're going to be together through this. So I got him quite early on in lockdown, and he was a soprano pipistrelle. And he was found at New Hales Estate, which is a National Trust property near Musselburgh. It's in East Lothian. I'm not sure if anyone knows of it, but it's really lovely. I very much recommend going. It's a very nice place. So some of the staff there were repainting a shed, and they noticed that he was out like in broad daylight in the shed, which is always a bad sign when you see bats out in broad daylight. So they then called the BCT helpline, who then also called me. So I went down to see Covey. Then when I went to see him, I did a quick inspection actually on site because he looked quite healthy when I first saw him. And I thought maybe he could have just been disrupted by the fumes and maybe he's fine. But when I had a look, he had a really big tear in his right wing. The photo's flipped, it is his right wing. And I saw this and thought, right, this could be an old injury or it could be new, but it's pretty big. So I'm going to take him home and do a proper test and see how he is. I'm hoping this video is working for you guys. I don't think the sound is, but this is Covey eating a mealworm. So this is what we tend to feed them, the adult bats. We feed them mealworms. It's not part of their like natural diet, but I'm not going to go and catch loads of midges. I think that'd be really difficult. But it seems to really work well for getting their fat stores up. Yes, he's very cute. He's quite a messy eater, but you can see he's quite happy. He's loving that mealworm. I still remember the first time when I was getting trained in bat care, because mealworms aren't a natural part of their diet. When you first feed them, my friend Amanda, who was teaching me at the time, she was qualified, she told me, I remember she said, she's like, you need to take the head off the mealworm. And I was like, what? No way, I'm not doing that. And no, you take the head off. And she's like, do you know a froob? And I was like, yes, I know a froob. And you have to take the head off and squeeze it like a froob and then put it in the bat's face. Now I'm like some kind of sociopath that can just rip mealworm heads off with no feeling because I'm now like 6 years in. But at the beginning, oh my goodness, it was really unenjoyable. And I love all animals, so I felt really bad for the mealworms as well. But I was like, you're feeding my bats, it's okay. But normally with an adult, you only need to do that once so they get the flavor, and then after they can take the whole worms without the decapitated ones. And you can put them into a little bowl and the bats will self-feed, so it's a lot nicer. And when we have babies, we hand rear them with like a puppy formula that's actually made for puppy dogs. But it seems to work really well. And some other carriers as well, if you need them to put on weight quite quickly, you can do the puppy formula mixed with a mealworm innard. So you've got to do the froob situation again, which is really not nice, but I will do it. I will do it for the bats because I love them so very much. And when I got Covey home, he was actually just a bit dehydrated and a bit hungry because he could fly with that wing. Like day 1, day 2, he didn't fly. He couldn't fly. He was really weak. He just had no energy. But after he got fed up with all the mealworms and lots of water as well, he was flying brilliantly. So luckily, I got to release him after about 4 days. So he didn't end up being my lockdown buddy. But yeah, he was really lovely. And I thought it'd just be nice to tell you guys a little bit about Covey and give you a little example of what it's like being a carer. And that's basically it from me. This is my useful resources list that I've made. So we've got the how to find your local bat group. This is specifically for Scotland. So I'm sure Catherine will share these around and you can have a click on these. And it'll show you which one's closest to you and who to contact for that. The detailed info and the fact sheets, and this is for all UK bats, that's the link here, and you can go through each one, you can click and get more detail. Like I said, it's got stuff on like their forearm wing measurements, what frequency they echolocate at, much more detail than what I went into. The Bats in Scotland leaflet is here, which is really, really handy. They do quite another few leaflets as well that are really, really good, got nice infographics on them, but I just really love this one. I've also put in the NHBS website. I don't know if you guys have ever used this, but I love this website. It's where I get all my stuff for bat care. It's where I get my gloves, where I get my calipers and things like that. But it has really great books. It has bat boxes. It has lots of bat survey kits, so like detectors and things like that as well. Also has for all other species, but I just really recommend it. I really love it. And lastly, I put some info on the National Bat Monitoring Programme. Their activities are currently restricted due to COVID-19, but like I said, they did do that lockdown like window sunset survey, which was really cool. And that's basically it from me. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on about my love of bats, and I'm more than happy to take any of your questions.